You're talking about the engagement from the Research Council into redesigning, in effect, the learning gain. But what about the influence that NUS can have, so in effect directly from the student side instead of Research Council, come from different sides?
Sure. Well, I mean, we influence that as well. We're obviously sitting on the learning gain steering group. But in terms of our responsibility through the student movement and through student unions, for a long time the student union has been sort of at the vanguard of talking about partnership and student engagement, and working with institutions to ensure that students are involved in decision making at universities, that they're involved in the governance structures of universities meaningfully, and not just you know, a bum on a seat somewhere, that actually that they have responsibility for improving education. And that's hard because students are busy, and often it's difficult for a student to see how to improve something that might not take effect until after they've left. And so it's important to look at ensuring that students are fully trained to understand how the environment works, how things like quality assurance and assessment work, how they can get involved in that, and what the benefits are. And I think that, broadly speaking, we have changed the discourse over the last 4 or 5 years in higher education, where most universities do, to some extent, and many of them to a great extent, take student engagement and partnership as being very, very important, if not essential, to the governance of higher education and universities, and how to find out how to improve it. And they don't just simply look at feedback scores at the end of the year. They don't just simply look at statistics. And if they do, then they consult students and they try and contextualise those. So we are seeing changes. The difficulty comes from the pressures, the external pressures of the market, the pressures of constant policy change, which mean institutions have to make difficult and often very quick decisions in an uncertain time in order to ensure their security and sustainability. And so a lot of these things, you know, and don't ally with that. Student engagement is something that will be an ongoing process that takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so instead of, because this takes time, is actually a much broader discourse, which fortunately is changing. On a smaller and more practical way, what is going to be actually the technical input from NUS into the TEF design, if any?
Well, we have obviously responded to many consultations. There seems to be a whole barrage of consultations from government at the moment, not just on TEF. Our response to the Green Paper and to the White Paper initially led to a series of changes throughout which were put into the Higher Education and Research Bill. So we managed to defer the decisions around the differentiation of fees. We managed to create better and looking at widening participation and access, and ensuring that institutions had to publish access and participation plans, and that they were publicly available, and that the powers of the Office for Students and in particular the Director for Fair Access had a degree of autonomy. There are a number of changes. We also ensured that student unions were not attacked in the bill, because there was a concern that the government were looking to clamp down on the student movement in the same way that they clamped down on the trade union movement and the trade union bill, which the whole sector came out in response and said that that would be a bad idea, because student unions are a positive force in the sector.
Yeah.
The TEF technical consultation led to a number of changes as well. We responded to the technical consultation. We ensured that there were a number of key changes around the way in which those metrics were going to be delivered. The biggest change that we wanted was to remove the highly skilled jobs metric from the TAF. We believed that that would be a very problematic metric. But we didn't manage to do that. But what we did manage to do was the government are going to look more closely at the way in which the occupational classifications are looked at, and there will be a review of that. So we have managed to change that at that level, and we obviously have various meetings with the Minister and with the Higher Education Bill team in the Department for Education, and those have been positive. We've And through those in particular, we've managed to ensure that postgraduate students, there is some understanding of where they fit in to all of this. They seem to fall, particularly research students, through the gap between the new Office for Students that was going to be set up and UKRI, which would manage research on the other hand. And we managed to ensure that there was some sort of compact between those two organisations to look after the interests of research students, which was very important. And of course we managed to ensure that there was representation for students, by students, on the office in the Office for Students. How can you have an Office for Students that doesn't have a student involved? And for a long time it looked like that was going to be the case, and that the student interest was going to be judged by people who went to university decades ago, which was highly problematic, and most people shouted about that. So we have managed to make a lot of changes already. In terms of in the future, there are campaigns already afoot to ensure that pressure remains on government. The biggest pressure will be to remove fees from the Teaching Excellence Framework. We can discuss as much as we like about how high tuition fees are, whether they should be raised more, and whether universities can be sustained without allowing inflationary increases. But the problem is the link between the two here. The fact that there is no link between the price of your education and the quality of it. But by linking the two together, you create this kind of, in economics terms, it's sort of a Veblen good. It's the idea that price and quality somehow go hand in hand. And so as things increase in price, the consumer thinks that the quality has gone up, when there was clearly no change in the quality of education when tuition fees were raised from 3 to 9K. We can talk about the fact that the actual amount of money going into that education stayed the same because the teaching grant got cut as the fees went up. But there is no relationship between price and quality in education, and trying to simulate a relationship between that is very dangerous, and it's very misleading to students who will pay more thinking that they will get more, and they won't, and it's unfair. And we think that needs to be removed. And so one of the only tools that we have left in the arsenal is to attack the one thing that students have control over, which is the National Student Survey. And so the NUS has decided to support student unions who called for a boycott of the National Student Survey. And the boycott is a protest to ensure that students don't have to basically sign up to a survey and give feedback that will ultimately lead to higher tuition fees for those who are coming in behind them.
Yeah, I see. So in effect, you are depicting the NSS as not a particularly good tool, let's say. Data coming from it actually also show that students, 80% of students actually don't have a clue what the TEF is. So fundamentally, though, we are saying that we are representing changes and we are impacting into the TEF, a new tool, but with a very small base, knowing what it is. How will that be addressed? We are talking about campaigns being held for the government to actually stay under pressure, but what about students understanding and knowing what's going to happen next?
Well, I think that the government care only about students understanding the basic data that comes out of TEF in terms of the sort of gold, silver and bronze medals that are given. So they've commissioned UCAS to take control of that, and through websites like Unistats and that sort of thing, there will be public information from the TEF that students will then be able to utilise to make what the government believe are informed decisions about which university to go to, and that data will be available to them. I don't think that the government have any particular interest in students knowing about the way that TEF works or how to get involved in TEF. It took a great deal of effort, particularly in the TEF technical consultation, to ensure that students were able to input into the written submissions that universities give in the TEF. And that was a very important move, because there was a move by government to completely isolate students and student unions from the TEF and prevent them from being involved in it, because they believed that students would try and undermine it. Well, actually students want to work in the best interests of their institution in order to promote good education, excellent education. They have no interest in undermining that. But if the TEF is not going to produce that, then obviously you have to look at ways in which that can be improved. And I think that most institutions see student unions and their representatives as being a critical friend and being able to point as to where improvements need to be made. And that doesn't necessarily look badly upon an institution when they're submitting to TEF, as the Higher Education Funding Council has suggested, that actually it looks like the institution is properly looking at feedback from students and taking that on board. And so it's important that that needs to be as part of the TEF. So students are involved there, but I don't think the government have any interest in promoting TEF to students in that way. I think that they see it much more in terms of a consumerist relationship, in terms of the public information that it generates so that they make decisions as to which institution that they go to.
On the side of NUS, are there plans underway to address this, to create more awareness about TEF?
No, I don't think that there are plans in that sense. I think that there are plans to inform students generally about the higher education reforms and what's going on and what impact that might have on their education and also, you know, on the amount of debt that they have when they leave university. And part of that will be informing them about the plans for TEF and what TEF means. But NUS won't be working to encourage students to go out and use TEF as a tool for the decisions that they make, because ultimately the information that is there in TEF is flawed, and so it could potentially misinform students rather than inform them. And we will be working closely with UCAS to ensure that the information that does go out to students is in a format that is best as possible, and that ultimately that some form of caveats are made on that information, and that the ability to use and encouragement to use other forms of information to make those decisions are there as well.
We can say that from the answers that you are giving to us and few interviews before, that there's a bit of uncertainty around, and always the changing landscape of higher education sector. We get this feeling, but do you have any, or could you give any advice for the students regarding?
Well, I think that there's still great opportunities that come from going to university. I think that students, or prospective students now, that are thinking of whether or not to go to university should consider their options. I think that they should look at the wider picture in terms of an increase in the number of apprenticeships, an increase in interest in improving further education and vocational qualifications, and alternative ways in which to go into higher education. And so to embrace that diversity and to look at what works best for them. I don't think that it's right to encourage everyone to go to university. I think that the Blair government sort of said everyone should go to university, that this is part of a knowledge-based global economy. We need everyone to go to university, and actually, to some extent, that leads a number of students to make the wrong choices about where to go, and they left university, you know, and you had an economic crisis, and they didn't know what to do, and they couldn't find a job. So it wasn't necessarily the right pathway for them. We should look at opening up new pathways and ensuring that students know about those new pathways. In terms of current students, I think that it's very difficult to know in terms of what's going to happen, but I think that we can certainly reassure students that they will still come out with a degree, that UK higher education is still excellent. There are not just pockets of excellence, but the universities around the country are excellent, and they do provide an excellent education. But that students should seek to do as much as they can to improve that, not just for themselves, but for those that come after them. And that doesn't mean conforming to this market idea that you just simply give institutions a wish list and then they kind of come up like Santa Claus with the presents at the end of it. That actually you have to give as well as take. as a student, that you have a responsibility to co-create the environment that you are involved in. And then actually that can be one of the most beneficial things of being at university, to be part of that co-creation, to feel part of an academic environment and a thriving intellectual community.
Okay, so on the note of student partnership, we bring the curtain down on today's edition of Research Live. Thank you very much, Dr. Adam Wright.
You're welcome.
For making time off to talk to us today. Thank you.
Thanks.